Hello, my name is Jeremy Arnold. I'm a senior business intelligence developer here at OneBridge in Indianapolis. Now that we've talked about how to get your data into the data model, most people find that's not usually sufficient to the task. The data wrangling phase is often quite difficult for a lot of people. Power BI Desktop, though, offers a myriad of options to easily transform your data into a more usable form. And that's what we're going to talk about next, how to get your data that's already in transformed so that you can get the insights you're looking to out of it. All right, and welcome back. For the second part, we're going to be discussing doing data manipulation in Power BI. So in the last session, we talked about identifying your data source, pulling it into your data model, and getting it into a place where you can start doing simple things with it. But that usually is not sufficient, right? Getting the data is not enough. Usually you have to wrangle the data in some way. You got to get it to fit the size and shape you're looking for so you can really do that next level analysis on it. And I have a really good example that we're going to walk through here on this. So I have a data set from data.world that talks about the percent of women in national parliaments going back to like 1990 by country. So it's like, in China in 1990 there were X percent of women in the national parliament, and then in 96 or 2000, etc., etc., etc. But that's not necessarily apparent when I just pull in the text file. So let's go take a look at this data. We're going to go to this Edit Queries window. And by the way, everything is treated like a query in this system. And this baseline CSV, this was the CSV that came across. So you can see I have this country code, I have country name, and then I have all of these columns by year. So 2015, 14, 13, blah, 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 blah. So it goes all the way back, and some of them have null values. So, like in 1990, there were some countries that had values, and then something happened, it looks like, where maybe there wasn't reporting in the early 90s, so those are basically not there, and so that's really those aren't very useful. But the rest of this data kind of looks interesting, right? So it looks like there's mostly a lot of reporting. I'm not quite sure what happened between 1990 and 91 when I'm just looking at it, but in this format, it's not really great for doing a lot of analysis, right? So there's a lot of things I'd like to do here. Maybe I want to remove those columns from 1991 to 1995. Maybe I need to reshape these columns because, like I said, having a column per year isn't really great if I want to group countries by year. I can sort of do that, but then I'm selecting a year, and that might be a little bit awkward. But how do I go about making some of those changes, right? Well, let's go ahead and let's make a duplicate of this table, just as an example. And we're going to call this, data exploration, because that's really what it is. So now I still have the data here. And what am I going to do with it? Well, let's first look at this 1991 to 1996. I can see pretty clearly when I look at this data set, there's nothing here. These are all null values. There's nothing, right? So that's really not very helpful. So I'm just going to click up here on the column. I'm going to hold down Shift and move over. Although you could obviously, if you control click as well. Lots of ways to sort of move through. If you're familiar with general Excel practices on how to move around a table, you'll be fine here. And you know what? I'm just going to get rid of these. I'm going to press the delete key. I removed columns. And it tells me here on the applied steps. It says, oh, you removed columns. But it doesn't necessarily tell me which ones. But if I go back to the navigation level, right? Well, it didn't show me that either. So that's not very good. So maybe I should rename this. So I'm going to say removed 1991 to 1996 columns. It would help if I spelled columns correctly. That's always good. Spelling is good. So now I have a record of what I did. Oh, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that, you know, because maybe there's a reason why those null values are there, and I should keep them. So how am I going to undo that? Is this little X right here? I'm just going to remove that. Oh, look, my columns are back. So, you will always want to keep an eye on your applied steps area over here, because that will give not only yourself, but other end users who may see the file a real insight into what you've done. If you're actually familiar with Power Query, this interface will seem very familiar to you, and you'll feel very comfortable in it, because a lot of those Power Query fundamentals are really baked in here, and it's really using that Power Query engine to great effect. So, you know what? I thought about it, and we should keep those columns out. They're not doing anything. So we're going to remove these columns. Yeah, and you know what? We're gonna rename it again. So, you know, removed 1991 to 1996 columns. Okay, but this doesn't quite get me to where I want to be, right? I mean, I still have the same general problem. The data is kind of in this weird look. You know, it'd be really nice if this were not pivoted in this way. All right, I can do that too. So we're going to take these columns. We're going to go to this transform tab. Now there's a lot of really cool options here. So you can, you know, group by, first rows headers, transpose, reverse rows, count rows, identify data types for different columns, etc. But we're going to unpivot these columns. What just happened? I unpivoted that, but what does that mean? Basically, you have to think of it like a pivot table. In this case, the pivot table is like, you know, it's saying, oh, you want all these columns. But really, those columns should be fields. So when you unpivot a column, what you're doing is you're taking that column, you're making it a field, and then you're dictating the values to it. So I'm taking all of these years, and I'm saying, you know what, let's unpivot these. But what if I just do 2 of these? Well, then that's going to be really awkward, right? Because now I still have this thing for like 2013, whatever. Oh, sorry. I should stay in the model window. You know, we'll maximize that so we don't do that again. And then you can see, you know, well, oh, so it has this 2014, 2015 thing, and those are all right, but, you know, I really want the rest of them to look like that too. So that's why you want to, when you do this, when you have multiple columns of the same type, it's usually a good practice to do it all at once. And so we're going to unpivot those columns. And, you know, we're going to rename this unpivoted year columns. Okay. So now I have this value that I'm not quite sure what it is anymore. And I have this attribute. Well, I know this attribute is the year. But that value, now what is that value? Now the good news is we actually do know what that value is. That's still the percent of a parliament that was made up of women in the year. Right? So now we have this really nice kind of look that's much easier to edit. But, you know, attributes, that's not very clear. So, you know, we should rename this. So this will be our new year column. Okay, oh, and it tells me, oh, you renamed a column. So if I go back up here, you'll see it still says attribute. I click here, now it says year. This one as well, you know, I should really rename that. So we're going to call that percent. So now it's like, oh, you renamed multiple columns. Yep, I sure did. But you'll notice that it doesn't give me another renamed column thing. So if I wanted to separate those, anytime that you do multiple of the same action in the same step, if it can group them together as one thing, it will. So that's just something to be aware of. So I'm going to say renamed year and percent columns. Okay. So now I have this data set, which I think is going to be much easier for me to work with because I like tall data, right? And what I mean by tall data is I mean fewer columns that are longer rather than more columns which are shorter, which would be wide data. So I like to work with tall data, so for me this makes a lot of sense. And then, you know what, I'm going to take this, I'm going to close this, I'm going to apply these changes. So it's going to go, oh, well, I'm going to make this data exploration table now. So I got to load it into the data model, and again, it's going to try to figure out connections, and you'll see, because I've kind of already done this one, that's what this unpivoted data thing is. Actually, we're just going to remove this table because it's already been done. And actually, this also is really great. So we're also going to talk about different types of connections. If you see like this one that's dotted out, that means it is inactive, or the model is treating it like it doesn't exist. And if you can turn it on, you can do that. But if you try to make this relationship active and it can't do it, it'll tell you why. So in this case, there's already a connection between the other tables, and it would make this one kind of redundant and could cause other problems for query creation, because it still, you know, has to think in its own internal engine about how to answer the questions that you're going to ask it. So that's why that one can't be active right now unless I deactivate one of the others. And there are two other things here. So you'll see like this one has arrows going both directions, which means it is bidirectional filtering. So each filter on one table, if it's referenced, will filter the other table, almost like an inner join, if you want to think of it that way. Whereas these arrows are one direction, and basically you have to think of it as those tables basically filter the table it is pointing at, almost like an outer join. So in this case, this baseline CSV is dictating to data exploration, or this continent dimension is dictating to data exploration. And so now we can kind of do some cool stuff. So you know what, we can create a simple table here, and I created a continent dimension. So continent, country name. Oh wait, why are there blanks? That's an interesting question. Not all of them are blank though. That's very interesting. Well, why would that happen? Well, that's a situation where my continent dimension table and the thing that is joined on, which I think it's country to country name, they're not exact. So where those things don't exist, it can't create a connection. But again, you have to remember, as we discussed earlier, how the filtering worked, and it kind of pushes down and dictates to it, which is why you can say, oh, well, I have this country name, but it doesn't have a representative continent, so that's basically creating a null value. Now I could go in and edit my continent dimension and fix these, but I kind of did that on purpose so you guys could see what that would look like. But for the majority of them, you see, yeah, it's that seems about right. But let's say I want to visualize this information now. Well, let's make a map. You know what? Everyone loves maps. So we're gonna have our country. Actually, we'll just use that. So this will be the location name, and this percent here. We're gonna make this the color saturation. So the higher the percentage, the better. You can see it's gonna think for a second. We're gonna go to data colors. We want them to diverge, right? Because we want them to be, red is bad, green is good. So, because generally speaking, we want more women in parliaments. They're pretty underrepresented, as you're going to see here. I'm actually going to blow this one up so we can really take a good look at it. So you'll notice, oh, wait, this also doesn't make sense. Why is it doing this? Well, because the default summarization is to sum the percent, and we haven't specified what year we're looking at. Well, let's do is let it go. So, but let's go ahead and change it to average. We want to know the average over the time frame, and it'll tell me it's now average of percent. Oh, so over the years we're looking at, which case is 1990, then 97 through 2015, Russia had about 11% of its parliament made up of women. The United States, about 15%. Sweden, 44%. South Africa, 32%. Spain, 31.5%. So I can very quickly sort of take a look here and say, well, what countries have done a really good job? But maybe, let's talk about the United States. At 14, almost 15%, how's that done over time? Is that really fair to the United States? Or is that something where maybe 20 years ago it was much worse? Well, how would we answer that question? Well, that would be really hard before, where we'd had all those year columns. But now, since we have the years in a single column, we can just filter on it, right? So let's put in a filter for the year. It's going to take a second. Maps are very kind of resource intensive. As you can see, it's doing weird things and it doesn't look very good right now. But let's just look at 2015. I probably have too many things open, which is probably not helping either. Yeah, I promise it's not normally this slow, but I have a lot of things running at the moment, which I really shouldn't be. Let's take this and let's blow it back up. Oh, this looks awful. There we go. I promise it's not normally that bad. So in 2015, the United States is up to 19.5%. Now, you can still see that's not great, right? And the cool thing is, if you have a year of an average, or if you have an average of one data point, you know that that's the data point. That's also another little trick. If you're looking for something, you're looking for the exact value of that data point, and you can get it down to that one data point. If you use the average or sum or whatever, it'll be that one value. So in 2015, the United States got up to almost 20%. I mean, that's significantly above its 20-year average, which would tell you it's trending the right direction. But you look at someone, like Sweden, well, they've held pretty steady around that 44% mark. South Africa has improved immensely. They're up to 41%. They were already really high before, right? According to their average. And then, you have Bolivia. Where did Bolivia come from? Bolivia is now at 53% of its parliament being made up of women. So what we have here is a really quick and easy way from this data set to sort of tell what's happening around the world over time with women and representation in different parliaments. Now, this data all the data here is available at data.world. You could go take it, reference it, put it in. Hopefully you won't have like 7 data models running at the same time, causing your map to look terrible, which I do apologize for, because that was really not great judgment on my part. But let's just say I want to look at it in a tabular way, and I want to know country name. Let's do average again, so I can say what was going on here. But let's just say I want to sort. Like, wow, in 2015, Rwanda, I can see who the top ones were. And some of them might be kind of surprising, Rwanda, Bolivia, Andorra, Cuba. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I apologize to the good people there. Sweden, Senegal, Finland. So, maybe, we might have this idea, oh yeah, like our Nordic Scandinavian countries, I'm sure they have great representation. I didn't know that Cuba was doing this well in terms of female representation in its parliament. I had no idea about Bolivia. Rwanda's a really interesting story, as Rwanda's had a terrible history, but it's kind of interesting to see how maybe that's changing as they've really adopted more and various views into their national legislature. So you can start to take this data and start to tell different stories, which is really the point of any business intelligence software, right? And doing it this way, we were able to tell this story very quickly because we did a little bit of data transformation in the first place. So that's just a quick example, throwing up some ideas on how you can do some basic data wrangling, get the data into an easier place for your mind to think about the analysis so that you can do that kind of work and do those kinds of comparisons. You know, one last thing. Let's just say we want to look at it on a continent by continent basis, right? So we're going to, because now some of the countries we know won't be here, but just at a sort of a general level, what if I wanted to do, you know, we'll do the average. You know, so ignore these blanks here, but you can see like the global average, I mean, with those countries missing because of the intentional data missing, we would say, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, Europe is the highest on average, but we know who those outliers are. And North America is, you know, pushing up there, but we know the United States is below this average, which means we know either Canada or Mexico are pulling it up. Or maybe some other, you know, in this case, North America includes some of the island nations as well. So things like Jamaica count as North America for this analysis, or Trinidad, Tobago, people like that. So we know that it's not the United States who's bringing that average up, because we're currently below that average. So again, just some quick examples on how you can take a data set. In this case, it was a text file from data.world, pull it in, do some very simple transformations using the query editor, and making some very quick high-level analyses that sort of help inform how we view the world and how we're viewing people in it. Again, I'm Jeremy Arnold, and I hope you've appreciated this opportunity to learn a little bit more about Power BI's native query editing opportunities and how to wrangle that data into a size and shape that is more manageable for you and your analysis. Next up, we're going to talk about direct query, the hows and whys and when tos. So I hope you'll stay with us for that. Thank you very much.